and welcome to Buck's ASMR. I'm Buck, and today is story time, brought to you by r/UnresolvedMysteries. Today's story is from LiviasFigs and is about the city of Teotihuacan. So sit back, relax, and let's go on an adventure. When the Spanish arrived in modern-day Mexico, they conquered the Aztec city of Teotihuacan. But this city was not built by the Aztecs, who discovered its ruins and claimed it as their own. Who really founded Teotihuacan, once the largest city in the Western world, and what led to its collapse? When the Aztecs stumbled upon the ruins of a great city in the Valley of Mexico around 13 or 1400 AD, they were awed. Even in its ruined state, abandoned and partially burned, it must have been a spectacular sight. This was certainly reflected in its name. It was Christian Teotihuacan, usually translated as birthplace of the gods, though some believe it may have been place of those who have the road of the gods, or city of the sun. Today, its original name is lost, as is the language it would have appeared in. Who created Teotihuacan, and why was their birthplace of the gods abandoned? The first human settlement at the site of Teotihuacan was around 600 BCE. By 300 BCE, larger settlements were forming, with Teotihuacan growing explosively. Soon, it was the largest urban settlement in Mesoamerica. No other Mesoamerican civilization would eclipse its size at its peak until the Aztecs 1,000 years later. The peak was in 450 CE. At this time, its population might have exceeded 250,000, covering over 11.5 square miles and home to over 90% of the basin of Mexico's population. The amount of Teotihuacan's cultural influence and how they wielded it is debated, though it was undoubtedly extensive. Architecture throughout Mesoamerica, for instance, bears similarities to Teotihuacan, though some believe these styles may have predated Teotihuacan. Most believe that, at least indirectly, Teotihuacan exerted huge amounts of power over the surrounding smaller civilizations, and likely commanded a vast network of trade routes and outposts. Why, then, do we know so little about it, and what was Teotihuacan society like? I'm going to briefly touch on Teotihuacan as a place first, because it's necessary to understand its potential causes of collapse. It was a multicultural city, divided by ethnic groups and further divided by class, of which three are evident: high elites, intermediate elites, and the laboring class. Interestingly, for such a large and powerful city, Teotihuacan shows no evidence of fortifications and military structures. But Teotihuacan is no less impressive for this. The city itself was a masterpiece of urban planning. Every street and north-south wall aligned at 15 degrees, and each major pyramid was positioned to match the stages of the sun and moon. Its site may even have been chosen for the natural lava tube caves over which the Sun Temple was built, all arranged along the broad central avenue known as the Avenue of the Dead. Even in its ruined state, the quality and scope of the architecture and urban design is incredible. And in these ruins, many archaeological finds have been made, though most bring us no closer to unraveling Teotihuacan's mysteries. Evidence of the habitation of large numbers of potters, jewelers, and craftsmen have been discovered, including large numbers of obsidian tools, as well as many as 10,000 murals. Up to 1/3 of its residents worked as craftsmen. This explosion of art has been compared to the Italian Renaissance, and these craftspeople were likely Teotihuacan's economic backbone. Because of their large production of finished goods, they had a controlling hand in the resin's trade, though how this worked is debated, and they may have installed administrators or established strategic settlements, and many believe that their direct influence was limited and their indirect influence was vast. The existence of these ties, however, is undebatable, as concrete evidence of Teotihuacan pottery has been found in other Mesoamerican settlements and vice versa. We'll talk a bit more about Teotihuacan itself, but before we discuss it and its people, let's first discuss what happened to it. By the time of Teotihuacan's fall, it was declining. Fascinatingly, though, Sources disagree on whether this decline was a slow one or an incredibly sudden one. So why was it declining? And what sounded the final death knell? The prevailing theories are invaders. This theory is less popular now, but it was the popular opinion for many years. Many of the buildings of the high and intermediate elite in Teotihuacan showed evidence of being burned and destroyed, and some archaeologists believe that outside invaders, sensing unrest in Teotihuacan, took advantage of the opportunity to plunder the city or rid themselves of a troublesome rival. Though we have little direct evidence, it would not be surprising if Teotihuacan was resented by other settlements. They did utilize human sacrifice, usually of foreign, likely captured people, and were strong adherents to a class hierarchy in which any vassal states would have been at the bottom. And remember, Teotihuacan had no military defenses at all, making it easy pickings. The most likely invaders are the rival cities Xochicalco and Cacaxtla, though little is known about this. Economic decline. As discussed, Teotihuacan's economic backbone was its trade. Its large population of craftsmen and control over commerce in the region kept it powerful, but around 500 CE, its influence seemed to have begun to weaken. Why? Mesoamerica was a large place, and as Teotihuacan increased its radius of power, its hold weakened. It's difficult to corral and control faraway places, especially with little communicative technology or writing. And the more cities under your influence, the more complicated this gets. Cities under Teotihuacan's control began to grow more autonomous, developing their own trading empires. By this time, Teotihuacan had likely come to rely on imported goods which they were now not getting. This could have been devastating to such a densely populated place like Teotihuacan. Environmental degradation, disaster. Another likely theory is environmental degradation. Teotihuacan was not a particularly green city. Wood fires to melt limestone for paint burned constantly, and vast amounts of resources were used in Teotihuacan craftwork. More important, however, was the potential degradation of the surrounding agricultural fields, needed to feed more and more people. This may have been compounded by dry conditions in Mexico around the time of Teotihuacan's fall and a phenomenon known as the El Niño Southern Oscillation, a meteorological process in which warm ocean temperatures in South America lead to a decreased amount of rainfall in the area. This would have devastated maize crops, their staple food, and could have led to famine and disease. Burials from this time show an increase in juvenile skeletons, which could support this theory. Others hypothesize that a volcanic eruption from the Ilopango volcano could also have led to agricultural collapse. The end of agriculture would have meant the end and abandonment of the city. Uprising. Towards the end of Teotihuacan, a consolidation of authority was visible. Hundreds more monuments were created, likely to legitimize and disseminate the central authority, possibly a completely new one, and the rate of human sacrifice increased as well as the rate at which military leaders were featured in artwork. Many new murals from this period are interpreted as evidence of this, showing men in headdresses, a Mesoamerican symbol of leadership, and the feathered serpent, or Quetzalcoatl, a symbol of a new era and new ruler. The nature of the rulership itself seemed to have changed as well, with the destruction of old monuments without the construction of new ones, something that may suggest both a stronger focus on administration over religion and a decline in power. Whatever the case, the intermediate elites were growing in power as a bureaucracy developed, leading to more competition and ethnic tensions, and the high elites weren't happy. More importantly, the laborers weren't happy at all. As you may remember, many of Teotihuacan's buildings were burned and ransacked, but as further research has uncovered, this was no haphazard destruction. Instead, politically and religiously important buildings were burned, such as civic structures along the Avenue of the Dead ad sculptures, suggesting that Teotihuacan's elites took part, unlikely, or this was done to them. Some archaeologists attribute Teotihuacan's fall to an internal rebellion, probably resulting from unrest concerning Teotihuacan's leadership. Yet some also suggest that the destruction had nothing to do with anger at the elite, but rather anger at the gods. Many of the destroyed structures were temples and religious iconography, which could suggest resentment toward the gods meant to protect agriculture and keep the people safe. This might also explain the uptick in human sacrifice, a last, desperate attempt to appease the gods and restore their city. Even if the theory about internal rebellion is true, though, some questions remain, such as what the final catalyst was and how things got so bad in the first place. All of the above. Some now believe that Teotihuacan's fall cannot be attributed to any of these causes on their own, but to some or all of them. According to this theory, a natural disaster or extreme environmental degradation struck Teotihuacan, leading to economic decline or the discontent of the populace. Eventually, the invaders, seeing the weakening of Teotihuacan, struck, or the people themselves rose up. Whatever the case, Teotihuacan was largely abandoned and faded from memory until the arrival of the Aztecs. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of refuse piling in the streets and certain ethnic enclaves blocked off, suggesting significant strife during the years of Teotihuacan's decline. The particulars, however, remain unknown. Teotihuacan's fall is not its only mystery, nor is it the one that most interests most archaeologists. To many, the most compelling question is not what happened to the inhabitants of Teotihuacan, but who they were. As mentioned, the city was multicultural. Teotihuacan seems to have been divided into sections for different ethnic groups, with most of the laborer class living in slums according to their ethnicity. This unprecedented multiculturalism has been attributed to a natural disaster that destroyed the nearby city of Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan, once rivaling Teotihuacan in size, was razed by the eruption of Mount Zaitel and the early eruption of Mount Popocatépetl, leaving its people refugees who likely fled to Teotihuacan and other nearby settlements. But was Teotihuacan always this way? It was first thought that the Toltec people were the original builders of Teotihuacan, but they reached their zenith far later than Teotihuacan. Others have suggested the Totonac, indigenous people of Mexico, as well as early Mayans, who were heavily influenced by Teotihuacan culture, Zapotec, and Mixtec. For now, all we can conclude is that Teotihuacan was a multi-ethnic state, but who initially created it and who dominated its culture is a mystery. We also know little of Teotihuacan's dominant language, possibly a precursor to Nahuatl, despite the fact that so influential a culture would likely have led to loanwords and other Mesoamerican languages. As far as the remainders of Teotihuacan's people after the fall, it's likely that a majority lost their lives in the invasion, famine, disease, insurrection, etc., and those who remained likely spread to other Mesoamerican civilizations, gradually losing any cultural identifiers, possibly even purposely as a way to distance themselves from a failed state. Today, dozens of excavations are ongoing at Teotihuacan. One of the most significant is an exploration of a web of tunnels uncovered after a heavy rainstorm wound a sinkhole under the temple of the plumed serpent. Incredible numbers of artifacts, over 75,000, have been unearthed, like jade masks, boxes of beetle wings, metal spheres, and the remains of human sacrifices. Many archaeologists now focus their study on traded Teotihuacan goods like ceramics, hoping to identify the extent of Teotihuacan physical and cultural diffusion. But the ruins of Teotihuacan are in danger. Human expansion is a constant threat, and as early as hundreds of years ago, Mexican farmers were unearthing and discarding Teotihuacan artifacts. There are also growing concerns about the increasing commercialization of Teotihuacan, such as a new light and sound show for tourists that has caused irreparable damage to the stonework. It leads to these pressing questions. Who founded Teotihuacan? What was its culture like? And what happened to it? I just wanted to thank LiviasFigs for compiling such an in-depth and compelling look at Teotihuacan and the mysteries surrounding its decline. Be sure to check out the link below and leave an upvote. And thank you for coming and relaxing with me. As always, feel free to subscribe for more content, and good